Welcome back to Questions You Didn't Ask with me, Niasha Fray, and my guests, Jennifer Thornton Jones and Dr. Gail Wyatt. As we continue the series, Ageless Intimacy, Real Talk for Women 40 Plus, let's dive back into the discussion. So, in that regard, in regard to what are the goals of women and what are some of the things that women are contending with who are 40 and older. We talked about at the beginning of this that we were all so excited about this discussion. And in that, I kind of pulled on my metrics and evaluation background and that humble curiosity that we talked about earlier. And I said, you know what, I think I can pull together a quick survey and get some responses from women about what they're experiencing at this phase in their life. Mm-hmm. And when I tell you my network worked, they were excited about this topic. They got their friends involved, their neighbors involved, their family members involved. And in 12 days, we got over 74 responses to this survey. I mean, it was amazing, right? So let me tell you a little bit about the participants. The majority of the women were African American. They also, most of them were, it was a fair balance between, rural community versus our urban and this and that. So I'll tell you specifically, there was about 49% were from urban communities, 41 from suburban, and then a small number, 11% from rural communities. And some of that is relevant as it relates to access to resources. Their ages ranged from 40 all the way to 75, with the largest group being that sweet spot that Dr. Wyatt was talking about, 46 to 50. 86% of participants were African American, and we had a small splattering of women who were of African descent, also Caribbean Black. Mm-hmm. Some were white, Latina, and indicated other. So we had an interesting demographic crosscut, not anything like, we're not trying to claim this to be like accurate and representative of the United States or anything, but just a sample, right? And some of the things that stood out to me in this survey, and I'm going to turn this over to our guests because they got a chance to see these responses. So for those of you who participated in the survey, thank you. We really, really have learned a lot from you. And this has shaped the conversation that we've had up to this point. But now I want to share some more about what really stood out to me. So when we asked people what were they most concerned about as they got older, the number one thing was hormonal changes. Mm-hmm. Number 2 was menopause. 3, as we've been talking a lot about, was sexual desire. And then there was a combined response of vaginal dryness, urinary incontinence, and dating or finding a sexual partner. We then went on and discovered that when it came to who they trusted, generally the top response was gynecologist, followed by female family members. And that could be elder female family members or peers, female family age peers, right? And then the third group was primary care physicians and friends. So the majority of women felt comfortable discussing sexual health issues with their healthcare provider. That was about 80% of women said that they felt very comfortable or somewhat comfortable. And 20% said that they were neutral, somewhat uncomfortable, or very uncomfortable. Again, the majority of women had 78% have a gynecologist that they see regularly, but 22% said they don't. And remember that age range that we talked about, 40 to 75. Ask them, does your gynecologist thoroughly answer your sexual health questions? 73% said yes, 28% said no. Jen, this was really interesting. I asked this question on purpose because you were the first time that I had ever been aware of a pelvic physical therapist. And I was curious if other women were kind of in the dark about this specialty as I was. And come to find out I wasn't alone because only 26% of our respondents said, 70, let me go back. Where am I at? Look, have you ever heard of a physical therapist? 26% said yes, and 74% said no. So I wasn't alone. But have you ever had a pelvic physical therapy? 93% said no. 93%. Only 7% said yes. And just to give you a number, that's 5 women out of 74 said yes.
Mm.
Then I asked, have you ever seen a sex therapist? Only 1 woman said that she had. 1. 99% or 73 of the women said no. And so then we talked about, where do people get most of their information? We talked about that earlier. Educational websites led 20%. That's great for people with internet, right? We always assume everybody has internet. 17% said that they got their information from healthcare providers. Books and articles came in about 16%. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dr. Gail Wyatt's book, Stolen Women. And counseling or therapy was 14%. So those are some of the major results from the survey. But when you guys had a chance to take a look, what stood out to you and why?
Well, I think Jen identified there are some physical, medical issues for African American women. We know that African American women are also more likely to die in childbirth, which you would not expect in the 21st century. I think access is critical here.
Mm-hmm.
Having either the means to pay for the kind of services you may need, or to live in an area where those kind of services are available to everybody, is critical. And I think that plays a major part in why African American health has been so influenced by access. Secondly, is the way that we're trained, that people don't understand these disparities along the history of the country and why certain groups were denied health care for hundreds of years. And now you see the results of that.
Mm-hmm.
That not having access in America has meant everything, or it's meant that you don't have a chance. And I see that because I work internationally in other settings where individuals don't have necessarily health care the way that we define it, or access. And their health is very different. Very different. So it's a simple story if you really look at the truth. And that is, America's done this to itself, because access should be available to everybody. I think that's a democratic kind of mandate. And that everybody ought to learn about everybody else, because all people are created equal. So we say. Haven't been able to see how that works out on a daily basis. But if we really believed in a democracy, we would not tolerate these kinds of disparities.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are in an election year.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an opportunity to say something about this with the people that we vote for. If we are actually aware of the fact that we will continue to be confronted with viruses that we don't have any medicine for, that we can infect each other with all kinds of things and and that we'll get diseases that we give to each other, either through sex or just talking. And we can do something about all of that. Then we will demand these rights, because these are inalienable rights that we've never achieved in this country. Some countries aren't even trying, but America has that opportunity. So it's frustrating to me, because we have so many wonderful gifts and opportunities in America that we don't even work for or fight for. We have to fight for this.
That's right. We do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's such an important point. I think it speaks a little bit to some of the survey results about, I definitely see it from a pelvic health perspective in terms of the amount of people who are aware of and know that we're a resource. I work with some absolutely fantastic OB-GYNs, urogynecologists, oncologists who are very aware of what we can do because of the system I am in and the amount of us that can kind of advocate for our patients and speak to our knowledge. So all of that, like the systems are being built on the education that people are getting as well. So I think, with that, some of the resources I did include are ways that people can try to find access to some of these resources. So I did put a link in that links to the American Physical Therapy Association's database of providers who are registered as board certified specialists in this area. So there is a website where you can provider search. I also put a link into the North American Menopause Society so that you can search for a certified menopause specialist provider. I do think that one really positive thing, at least that I feel like has come out, I know this is a weird thing, but sometimes there's always silver linings. So a positive thing that I think came out of COVID is more use of like telehealth and digital resources to gain access. And so for some of my patients who are in an area where maybe there is not a sex therapist, they might be able to now gain access with telehealth. And I think that there are, I will say that like femtech companies are hugely on the rise right now. So we are seeing more awareness of some of these issues. It's just about in the real time, how are we like bridging that gap to access and education and information? And kind of to speak to your point of like, at what time points are people more ready to hear this? So this is something I talk about a lot when I'm mentoring PTs, which is like, you can educate and educate and educate, but if you're not doing it in a way and at the right time that person is able to accept it, that's not education. That's just you're talking into a void. And so figuring out those aspects of how to increase this knowledge and awareness around women's health are really important.
I absolutely agree. One of the things that we found in doing research in underserved populations is that many people don't have a computer, don't have a laptop, and they don't have Wi-Fi. So even if they did have a computer or a laptop, they couldn't really get to the internet. They had no internet access. And so we bought tablets for individuals so that we could participate with them in interventions. Because again, the whole telehealth issue has grown to the point where we realize we're not reaching a lot of people simply because they're not going to get on freeways like in Los Angeles, and drive for hours to get someplace and then pay $15 to $20 for parking. They're not going to do it. So they go home and listen to people in their communities, give them kind of the cult, the folklore around medicine or how to deal with different problems. I think we can do better. I think that if we acknowledge that these are basic needs of people, and that by giving a family a tablet meant, and teaching them, because teaching them ended up being really hard. Some people don't read, or they don't read well. You have to literally give them the basics of how to read in order to know how to follow instructions on turning on that tablet. Is that their children can do their homework online. They can get their appointments for medical needs or any kind of appointments online. Read the newspaper online and find out what's happening in the world beyond their communities. And they can participate in health prevention. So we're hand in hand on that, Jen. That's one way to deliver some of the information that we're talking about that people need. Sex therapy is way too expensive for people. They'll never go to a sex therapist. So it's got to be available in another way. It's got to be available in podcasts or in books or workshops, things like that I'm thinking about offering, because that's just something that's it's like icing on a cake. And most people, if you're struggling to pay your bills, you're not going to pay a sex therapist. Learning about your pelvis and what you can do to strengthen muscles around it, you can learn online too. I did Pilates online during COVID. I didn't think it would be very much fun, but when it came down to Pilates versus nothing, I got on with it. I had to just, locate that laptop in a certain way so that my teacher could see me doing the exercises, and it worked because I made it through. And that's not the best. The best would be to just have a teacher all by myself. Well, that again is a fantasy, and we have to deal with reality. So it got to be fine once I allowed myself to take the fantasy out of it and just be appreciative for what I could do.
Mm.
I do
Very,
think
very,
there are
very good
more.
advice. Mm-hmm. Go
I
ahead,
also
Jen.
think there are more clinicians who are out on social media doing education, and there are definitely pelvic health therapists that are out there to speak to these issues. There's a wonderful urologist who specializes in sexual health, and her name is Dr. Ashley Winter, and she has a wonderful, well, I guess not Twitter anymore, X area, which is a wonderful source of education as well. But it's just a case of knowing in those social media settings who's a reputable and how to even check if someone's a reputable source.
And then giving them permission. Men need just as much education. We could have spent the
Mhm.
whole time talking about how men are being, I think, corrupted to be very strange people sexually by being educated with porn. Really. I mean, they're odd
Yes.
partners because they actually think women act like those women do in a porn movie. So, I think it does men a disservice. They don't learn how to be tender and gentle, and they don't understand their erections are just
Mm-hmm.
as much a part of what's going on in their heads.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a physiological response if they really want to enjoy sex in their bodies. So there's a lot we're missing in our world today. With all that's available, we're getting wooed away with some things that are far too simplistic. And we need to step back and be more discerning and selective and appreciative for what we can do when we can on our budgets. But we can do a lot. We can change this world. We can make a difference. We can have these kinds of conversations. I didn't know you, Jen, but I sure am glad to know you now.
I'm so lucky to have been able to speak to you, Dr. Wyatt. I'm just in awe.
So, we do better, don't we? When we reach out, and it's because of you, young lady, that we
Thank you.
were able to do this, that you had the heart and the
Yes.
mind and the head to know that women need so much more of this.
Yes, yes. And I just want to tell our audience, there's some wonderful resources that have been shared today, and there will be more that accompany this podcast. But I want to speak to a few that have been shared. The first being Stolen Women by your very own Dr. Gail Wyatt. Stolen Women, Reclaiming Our Sexuality, Taking Back Our Lives, published in 1998. Still a wonderful, wonderful read. Just to give you an idea of what some of our leaders and fellow authors have to say, B.B. Moore Campbell left a review that said, Stolen Women gives us what Mama couldn't, a way to be in charge of our own bodies. This probing, fact-based book dissects the myths, discards the stereotypes, and unshackles our minds. Now you can see why questions you didn't ask has been so heavily influenced by leaders like Dr. Gail Wyatt, because that's a lot of what we do on this show, Dr. Wyatt.
I'm so glad you're having these conversations.
Yes.
And I miss BB every day. I know she's in her heavenly chair sitting back and listening to this conversation right now.
Yes, and honoring our ancestors is very important.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a book reader, Jen has provided some book titles. Come As You Are by Dr. Emily Nagasaki. Sex Talks, The 5 Conversations That Will Transform Your Love Life by Vanessa Marin. And then there's some additional podcasts that you might really enjoy. Foreplay Radio, Couples and Sex Therapy. There's another podcast, Sex with Emily. She has her podcast. And of course, there's some apps, Rosie. Check those out if you're online. And then, of course, another website, and there's more, but I'll just leave you with these, omgyes.com. Dame Wellness is another. Its intimacy workshops are featured on that website. And so, as you can see, our guests are providing us with some wonderful resources that we can trust from folks that are very well educated in this space and know what they're talking about and have our best interest in mind. Okay. Not all this confusion and hysteria that happens if you just, randomly pick a source. We have some very specific sources that you can trust and find trustworthy. We welcome your feedback. We welcome more questions. And we will be continuing this conversation with more guests to expound on this topic and the survey results we experienced. So I'm going to give you all a chance to make any last comments before we close out, but I want to say thank you. This conversation has enriched me, and I'm sure that it has enriched my audience. And I'm so glad that I was able to introduce you, Jen, to Dr. Wyatt and vice versa. This has been a rich and just invigorating conversation for me, and I'm just so thankful we were able to share it.
I just want to thank you for inviting me and not forgetting all the work that I've been doing. Actually, I've been at
Couldn't.
UCLA for 50 years, and I'm getting ready to become an emeritus if they will have me, which means I will work only part time. And I'm working on the book that will continue with Stolen Women, 20 more years of research on African American women. And it's just a very exciting life. I'm very grateful to God every single day to just give me the strength to do what it is I'm supposed to do while I am a mother and a wife and a grandmother. And I hope one day a great grandmother. All those experiences I have enjoyed, but the one I enjoy the most is that I'm doing what my parents wanted me to do, and that was to make my work, make my mark on this world that I'm doing every day, and I'm going to do that until I can't do it anymore.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you very, very much, Jen, and for talking with me. I've learned a lot myself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Like I said, it's really just an honor to be with both of you today, and an honor that I get to speak to this topic. I think my main thing I would like people to really take away is that sexual health is health, and you have a voice to start to ask some of these questions to figure out how this fits in your life. And I would encourage everyone to find a way to figure out how they want to discuss this with their providers, with each other, with themselves, and start that kind of thought process, because you're worth it. This is it's something that everyone is going to go through in terms of life changes, and you are worth figuring out solutions that work for yourself. And also I hope to take away that there is a community out there that you can look for, that you can find, so that you can find information, so that you can ask better questions, that you can figure out the right questions you even want to pose. So I guess I just want everyone to know that if there's something that they are struggling with, that there is information and resources that are out there. You're not struggling on your own.